Welcome along. Breaking news tonight that GB News can reveal before anyone else. After the Southport massacre, the government ordered an urgent review into the counter-terror programme Prevent, the same programme that Axel Rudikabana was referred to 3 times before he stabbed children to death. Now, before I get into the details, we approached the government earlier today about what I am about to reveal. They hadn't decided on their response to this report. Well, it looks like they've been spooked into one, and in the last few minutes have decided to reject the advice. Left to their own devices, though, who knows? Well, earlier today, I came into possession of a leaked roundup of this Prevent report. Now, I hate to tell you this, but it looks to me as though this report is using the Southport attack as a way to, yet again, downplay the threat of Islamist extremism and increase the chances that someone could be classed as far right. The roundup appears to give radical Islamist extremism the same amount of page space as extreme misogyny, environmental extremism, and the movement for Sikh independence. This is despite the fact that in Great Britain, Islamists are responsible for 94% of all deaths caused by terrorism since 1999 and around 88% of injuries caused by terrorism over the same period. Last year, Islamists account for 80% of the police's counter-terror caseload, 75% of MI5s and 63% of terrorists in custody. Now, can you guess what this report now classes as an example of the far right? Believing in two-tier policing or expressing grievances about the amount of resources being given to asylum seekers and illegal immigrants, like migrant hotels, for example. The details we've seen gives just one case study into Islamist terrorism, which is the same amount of time it dedicates to the environmental group, the Earth Liberation Front. They dedicate just 160 words, it appears, to Anjem Choudhury. The report barely mentions Islamic blasphemy extremism, like Batley Grammar School. The roundup seems to put a huge emphasis on misogyny, right? Bangs on about the manosphere. Well, I'll tell you what's interesting about that, though. It appears to skirt over the largest example of extreme misogyny that Britain has ever seen, the Pakistani rape gangs. In fact, well, you'll love this, and by that I mean hate it, obviously. The main mention of grooming gangs comes under the far right section, which states right-wing extremists frequently exploit cases of alleged group-based sexual abuse to promote anti-Muslim sentiment, as well as anti-government and anti-political correctness narratives. Now, from what I've seen, I don't think I'd wipe my backside with this report. What it seems to want to do is this: take the focus off ideologies and put that on individual behaviours. Now, OK, I can see the logic there to an extent, but it would take the focus off Islamism, say, and put more on, oh, do they have an obsession with gory content online? But this is a problem for 2 main reasons, as I see it. Number 1, it lets radical Islamist organisations off the hook. The report does not appear to mention things like radical mosques, Islamic centres, radical private schools, forums, etc. The man who reviewed Prevent was William Shawcross. Now, he is on record saying that there has been an attempt to minimise radical Islamism within the Prevent programme, and that this is a problem. And now, look what's happening. So to be really clear on this, and this is mind-blowing, right? In August 2023, a report called for Prevent to shift more focus towards Islamist terrorism instead of right-wing terrorism. And at the start of 2025, here we are, we've got less focus on Islamist terrorism and apparently more focus on right-wing terrorism. Earlier today, I spoke to Shadow Justice Secretary Robert Jenrick to get his views on the perceived downplaying of radical Islamism.
I haven't seen the report yet, but from what I have heard, it seems like a very worrying situation. We've got to follow the facts here. Of course, violence against women and girls and some of the other issues raised in this report are important and warrant attention by the police and the authorities. But the facts are these. In the last 25 years, 95% of all the terrorist deaths in this country have been Islamist related, and 80% of all the referrals to the police. So when it comes to how do we use the scarce resources of the police, of programmes like Prevent, of our security services, we've got to be honest and realistic and not allow political correctness to get in the way.
Well, as I was saying, there's a second thing that I think is wrong with this. This will end up classing more people as extremists, and it will swamp Prevent. So we've already seen how apparently if you moan about two-tier policing or how much taxpayers' money is spent on illegal immigrants, you are now far right. So we'll all be on Prevent soon, won't we? And this brings me to my next point. I can't help but wonder whether Prevent, an organisation criticised heavily by the apparently very intimidating Muslim Council of Britain and several left-wing authors who write lofty articles for the New Statesman, has A, caved into the Islamist mob, or B, just wants more money. In their document, they seem to say that they can deliver some drastic changes, but only with an extra 180 million quid's worth of funding. So let me be very straight with you here. The Labour government commissioned a review into Prevent in the wake of 3 little girls being horrifically murdered by an evil, raging lunatic in Southport. It now appears that this report has chosen to minimise Islamist extremism and made it easier for people to be classed as far right. It's the same story every time, isn't it? Well, Dan Jarvis joins us now, who is the security... Oh, sorry, no, he doesn't. It's a statement from Dan Jarvis, the security minister, responding to the leaked documents in the Policy Exchange report, saying ministers have rejected this advice. As we have said repeatedly, Islamist extremism followed by far-right extremism are the biggest threats we face. The Home Secretary set out last week our plans to carry out an end-to-end review of Prevent thresholds on Islamist extremism because we are concerned that referrals are too low. Ideology, particularly Islamist extremism, followed by the far-right extremism, continue to be at the heart of our approach to countering extremism and counter-terror. But as the horrific Southport attack shows, alongside that, we also need more action on those drawn towards mixed ideologies and violent, obsessed young people. I am joined now by the head of security and extremism at Policy Exchange, Paul Stott. Paul, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. So Labour have chosen to reject the findings of this report, OK, but just in itself, this report is quite concerning, isn't it? It appears to me that in the wake of the Southport attack, they appear to have used that, or used the opportunity to review themselves anyway, in that sense, to downplay radical Islamism and maybe make it easier for people to be classed as far right. What's your views?
Well, what we've seen in these papers is that there's a series of documents which were leaked to Policy Exchange, which are part of the government's counter-extremism sprint, which Yvette Cooper announced, or the government started work on pretty much soon as it took office in August. And as you've outlined, there are some areas of real concern in there. There are actually one or two sensible things. I suppose that's inevitable in a large series of documents. There's a ministerial board, for example, so all of the ministers in government, or many of them, who have extremism issues cross their desks, are all brought together, so things shouldn't slip through the net as easily. But there are some real areas of concern in terms of focus, the decline in focus on Islamism, which is the greatest threat that we face. And quite simply, the centre of gravity for any counter-extremism strategy in this country has to be fighting, opposing Islamism and Islamist terrorism. And unless the government gets that right, its counter-extremism work will fail.
So the government wanted this report. So can you just explain to our viewers and listeners who actually crafted this report? And also, as a follow-up question, so if they've now rejected the findings of it, then, well, frankly, it's not worth the paper it's written on, is it? And probably wasn't worth the taxpayers' money.
No, these are Home Office documents, and they've been produced by officials for ministers. For their consideration. As we say in the conclusion to our report, our analysis of these documents, it's not the final say, because ministers ultimately should decide on what's taken forward on the basis of the advice. The big problem is the fact that the advice is clearly so poor and is creating a whole series of, if you keep branding different behaviours as extremist or potentially leading to terrorism, the haystack is going to get bigger and bigger, and the needles are going to get harder to find. And I mean, you touched on some of the examples, but it's pretty frightening to see a government, for example, which wants to focus on violence against women and girls. That's fine. That's a necessary thing to do. But unless you're going to focus, for example, on the grooming and the rape gangs that we've seen, and some of the attitudes towards white girls which were displayed by some of those perpetrators, well, it's not a serious strategy against to defend women and girls.
I think it should be absolutely terrifying to people watching and listening to this that was the advice that was given to government ministers. And fair play to them for rejecting it, because I think they had to, because it looks absolutely awful. It looks shocking. But it just gives you an indication, does it not, of the psychology of people going on behind the scenes. Paul, can I just say a massive thank you to you and to everyone at Policy Exchange as well. It's been a pleasure to have you on. I do hope to talk to you again very, very soon. I imagine you'll be a man in demand tomorrow as well, to be fair. So Paul Stott there, who is the Head of Security and Extremism at Policy Exchange. Let's whiz ourselves over and get the views of my panel this evening. We've got Daily Express columnist Carol Malone, journalist and broadcaster Benjamin Butterworth, and the former chairman of the Tory party, Sir J. Berry. Carol, I absolutely cannot believe that in the wake of the Southport attack, a report into Prevent was commissioned, a review into it, and the upshot of that was to basically make anyone who's got concerns about taxpayers' money on migrant hotels be officially classed as a member of the far right, and to not include, just basically pretty much swerve Islamism.
This government now, this country, the people running this country, they have a fatal unwillingness to confront Islamic extremism. And this report, you said fair play to them for rejecting it. I think if they thought they could have imposed this on us, they would have. But I think they know they're never going to get away with it in a million years. One of the things this report, done by a group called Sprint, which the Policy Exchange has called confused. They're way more than that. They're evil and they're dangerous. They have called the grooming gangs, quotes, an alleged problem. They have said two-tier policing is a right-wing narrative. This is outrageous. You know, this is everything that the people in this country are currently raging against, and it's a slap in the face to the people in Southport, to the victims, to their families, and to the people generally in Southport, because especially in the light of the fact that we now discover the police try to hide the terror element of Ruba Kubana's crime. So we know now that the people in this government want to hide Islamic terror. You mentioned some stats there before, and you said that 94% of all the deaths. Also, 75% of MI5's caseload last year was on Islamic extremism, 80% of police of counter-terrorist time. So this cannot be deprioritised. And what they're trying to say, let me just say this, what they're trying to say is a harmful communication is every bit as dangerous as Islamic extremism.
Well, they also, one of the other things that they were very keen to do was go against what the government initially said, which was to increase non-crime hate incidents, which is, again, a bit of a shocker. Before I come to you, Benjamin, I want to come to you on this. Do you think that had this not been exposed tonight here, essentially leaked and exposed here at GB News through Policy Exchange, etc., that they would have gone ahead and imposed this on us?
100% yes. I can tell you, the civil service, this was a reaction to the appalling events in Southport. What an insult to those families who are mourning the death of their beautiful girls, that the government would go away and commission civil servants, and the civil servants, Prevent in this case, would come up with these sort of recommendations. How disgusting that would happen. Southport should have been a moment of unity for this country, people coming together in shared revulsion at the appalling crimes. And this goes completely against that. It's an absolute disgrace. And, you know, it'd be very easy for government to say, well, we're not going to accept this. This is just civil service waffle and you know, we don't accept it. Of course, leadership comes from the top, and the government will have set the framework that they would have asked Prevent to go and look at, and they have responded. This is a reaction to what the Labour government asked Prevent to come up with.
I think this shows, and I think we've actually maybe clocked this. Now, you know, Labour might deny this, and to be fair on them, I'll say it again, they've released a very strongly worded statement saying they're going to reject the findings of this report.
Yeah. So they knew what was going to happen
make it very clear. But no, that's only fair that we say that. But I think, reading between the lines here, that report, in my view, was commissioned to say, how do we stop future disorder after an incident like the Southport attack?
Well, look at the dates.
How do we stop the Southport attack?
This was a reaction to the Southport attack. You can see it from the dates. And let's look what else is in this report. They say that anything that is going to create psychological harm should be treated as an act of terrorism, basically saying that they're criminalising upsetting people, which last time I checked shouldn't be a crime. And they're also saying people who believe in conspiracy theories, maybe they believe in UFOs, maybe they believe about the flat earth, should be treated the same as murderous Islamist terrorists. This is a disgrace, and it's the government failing in its only duty, that is to keep the people of this country safe.
But when you look at this, I mean, Carol put a point there, which is that there appears to be a desire to downplay and hide the threat of Islamist terrorism. Would you agree with that?
That's quite obviously a completely unreasonable conclusion. And
is it?
Well, have you not read the report? That's what the report says.
You just said something really clear. But he just said something that's entirely wrong. So when David Amos was stabbed to death by a Somalian guy who had been referred to Prevent, why is it that people like Sadiq Khan said he passed away? Other MPs talked about him like he died of natural death. They did not talk about an Islamist extremist stabbing him to death.
Murdering him.
Well, you can't say stuff that's not true.
Well, it is true. And to try and question the motives of people as though they don't care about Islamist terrorism. You know, the person that gave you that comment, the security minister Dan Jarvis, spent 14 years serving this country in the armed forces. He's fought in Iraq and Kosovo and Sierra Leone. So I don't think he needs lectures on tackling extremism and keeping this country safe, given he's done more than anyone sat around this table.
Well, Neil Bassett, who used to be in charge of the counter-terror commander in this country, said this report was dangerous.
And that's what Dan Jarvis has effectively said. He's rejected it. That's the government's position.
Yeah, so is the problem not, this is the advice that government ministers are getting from people in the Home Office behind the scenes? Shouldn't that terrify us, Benjamin?
No, I mean, they've rejected the results, and I read the Policy Exchange article, and it seemed a bit much. And that's because, you know, it's right that you ask questions after things seriously go wrong. You know, and that's what they've done, and they've said these aren't the right answers.
So what are they doing about it, then?
Why did the government hide the terror aspect of Rubana?
But it didn't hide it because it had to make sure that you got the prosecution.
Yeah, of course they did. No, that is absolutely wrong. You're wrong on the facts and you're wrong on the law. There was a period before the individual had been charged. Let me finish. Keir Starmer admitted this. Go back and watch the press conference before the individual had been charged, where they could have outed the fact that he was a terrorist. It's what they did on the London Bridge attack. It's what they did on the murder of PC Palmer. It's what they did to the guy who stabbed 3 people in Manchester Airport. Keir Starmer chose to lie to the British people and admitted it on national television. And I tell you what, I'll tell you one more thing. He's called for Boris Johnson to resign because Boris Johnson misled Parliament. What should Keir Starmer do after he has lied and lied again to the British people, misleading families?
Go back to all of that. Go on, Ben.
I think the former Director of Public Prosecutions knows plenty about ensuring people are prosecuted.
Really?
And what happened in that case was he pleaded guilty. Now we all know far more about him, and he's going to prison for decades.
Can I just say, the former DPP said that it would have been a contempt of court to say there was a terror offence, when a dozen barristers came out the following day and said that was tosh. It would not have been.
You can't be in contempt of court before someone's been charged.
Yes.
It's the law of the land.
Of course, he was going to be charged, and you
was going to be.
And of course, the fact is that person is now going to prison for life. So what happened was right. And if you listen to people online, people like Tommy Robinson on these kind of cases, you would have these cases collapse. And the people that have caused serious disruption in the last year, tearing up town centres, are far-right thugs. And you should not cry away for
what I don't get is, and I don't think many people get, certainly, is if you're going to put such an emphasis on misogyny, which this report does, and put that on the same pedestal as you're going to put it on as radical Islamism, seemingly, why would you not mention the largest scale act of misogyny this country has ever seen, which has been the industrial scale torture and rape of mostly vulnerable working class white girls by predominantly British Pakistani men? And the only
why would you call it an alleged problem?
Yeah, because the victims think it's alleged.
It's a perfectly valid question. And why didn't you put it to Robert Jenrick when you asked him? Why didn't you put it to Kemi Badenoch?
He didn't write the report.
No, but when they were in government, when they were responsible for these questions, they never mentioned it. So it's a bit rich to sit there saying this report doesn't mention it. No, it's a valid position.
Why should Labour?
It's a valid position because it's hypocrisy and it's taking people for fools.
All right, guys. Well, look, hey, that report was written by Home Office officials behind the scenes, and as far as I should say, I think if the government's rejecting it, but what happens to those officials now? That's the thing. What should happen to those officials if they've written a report which the government has said is not fit for purpose and completely misses the point? Do those civil servants face any kind of punishment? We'll come back.